When we imagine an ancient temple, we usually think of altars. We think of fire. We think of smoke rising toward the sky. We imagine animals offered to unseen gods. We imagine ritual as something contained within stone walls and formal gestures. But there is a quieter question hidden inside every act of sacrifice. A question archaeology has rarely stopped to ask. Who prepared the meal? Blood does not enter ritual on its own. Meat does not turn into food by accident. And gods, whatever they were believed to be, could not be sustained by symbols alone. For much of the 20th century, archaeology in the southern Levant accepted a convenient division. Worship belonged to sacred space. Cooking belonged to daily life. Even when thousands of animal bones were found inside temple precincts, cut and burned and eaten over generations, their preparation was assumed to have happened elsewhere, out of sight, off stage, as if ritual could exist without the labor that made it possible. At a site called Ataruz, east of the Dead Sea, this assumption begins to break down, because the evidence here refuses to stay separated. Animals were slaughtered, prepared, cooked, and eaten, all within the same sacred landscape. Just outside the temple courtyard, archaeologists uncovered two small rooms. Their floors were layered with ash. Grinding stones lay where they had been used. A heavily scorched cooking pot remained in place. These spaces were rebuilt again and again, not repaired once, but returned to. This was not improvisation. It was continuity. Beside these rooms, a natural bedrock surface was left deliberately exposed. It was carved with a circular hollow. Shallow channels ran across its surface. A low wall stood downslope, waiting to catch what flowed. When liquid was poured into the stone, it followed those channels exactly. It pooled where it was meant to pool. This was not erosion. It was design. Together, the kitchen, the stone, and the surrounding spaces form a single system. A system in which sacrifice did not end at the altar. It continued through preparation. And it culminated in a shared meal. If the kitchen shows us how food was prepared, the spaces beyond it show us something else. They show us who was meant to eat. To understand a ritual meal is not only to ask what was consumed. It is to ask how often it happened, and whether it was meant to be remembered. East of the temple courtyard, archaeologists excavated two adjacent areas, later labeled E6 and E7. They were not refuse pits. They were not cleaned between uses. Their floors were rebuilt repeatedly. Each surface laid directly over the remains of the last. Within these layers, nearly 4,000 animal bone fragments were recovered. Not from a single event, but from centuries of repeated gatherings. The pattern was striking. More than 90% of the identifiable bones came from sheep and goats. These animals were not chosen at random. They were manageable, divisible, and deeply embedded in ritual practice. Cattle appeared only rarely. Pigs were entirely absent. That absence matters, because silence in the archaeological record often speaks more clearly than presence. Across multiple building phases, the pattern did not change. Political shifts came and went. Architecture evolved. But the meal remained the same. There were variations. Deer appeared occasionally, not often enough to dominate the record, but too consistently to ignore. Deer were ritually acceptable, but not formally prescribed in later traditions. Their presence suggests flexibility. It suggests that practice sometimes moved ahead of doctrine. Cut marks on the bones reveal systematic butchery. Charred surfaces indicate roasting. Fragments of Taban ovens point to bread baked nearby. These were complete meals, not symbolic gestures. What matters most is how these remains accumulated. They were not swept away. They were built over. Each meal became part of the ground itself. Eating here was expected to leave a trace. To eat in this space was to belong. Before food could be cooked, an animal had to be killed. At Ataruz, this act was not hidden. It took place on stone, in plain view. Unlike other areas of the temple, this bedrock surface was never paved. It was left exposed, and it was modified. A circular cup was carved into the stone. Shallow grooves extended outward. A low wall stood below. When water was poured into the cup, it flowed along the grooves. It gathered behind the wall. This surface was not meant for grinding or storage. It was meant to direct liquid. In ancient ritual systems, blood was never treated as waste. It carried life. It was poured, dashed, applied. The carved stone at Ataruz fits this logic precisely. Broken projections within the cup may have helped secure an animal's body during slaughter. The grooves ensured that blood moved where it was intended to go. Violence was turned into sequence. Sequence became ritual. What makes this installation remarkable is its location. It lies beside the kitchen, within sight of the dining areas. Later traditions would separate these acts: slaughter, preparation, consumption. At Ataruz, they remain connected. Killing was not the climax. It was the beginning. Meaning emerged not from destruction alone, but from what followed after. Taken together, the evidence from Ataruz reveals something larger than a single discovery. It reveals a different way of understanding ritual itself. Here, the temple was not organized around one dramatic moment. It was organized around a sequence. Animals were brought in, killed, prepared, cooked, and eaten, all within the same sacred system. Ritual authority did not rest only with priests. It was distributed across participants. Worship was not only witnessed, it was performed through labor. Floors were rebuilt. Meals accumulated. Memory became architectural. Each generation stood upon the remains of the last. Belief here was not abstract. It was practiced. Eating together carried theological weight. It reinforced social bonds. It reaffirmed relationships with the divine. The sacred was not separated from the everyday. It was sustained through repetition. Cooking mattered because it was familiar. Butchery mattered because it was necessary. Dining mattered because it created belonging. At Ataruz, ritual power did not come from spectacle. It came from persistence, from meals prepared again and again, over centuries. Religion here was not something people visited. It was something they lived, through their bodies, their labor, and the shared act of eating in the presence of the sacred.